police departments around the country are notorious for turning a blind eye towards officers who have committed serious offenses. I'm Katherine Sheffield, the host of A Few Bad Apples, a weekly podcast that takes listeners into deep dives of crimes committed by bad apple officers. Not all policemen are bad, and in fact, I highlight a positive story at the end of every episode. Sharing these victim stories is my way to provoke change within police departments. A Few Bad Apples is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey everybody, welcome to True Crime Freaks, my new podcast. I want to tell you about the different ways you can support this podcast. One is you can go to my other podcast, Lights Camera Pro, where I interview TV and film professionals about their careers. And I also do movie reviews and TV show reviews. You can check out one of my online courses. I've got an Adobe Premiere Basics course and a Secrets of How to Start a Podcast course. Those are at thinkific.com. Just search them when you go there. We also have a merch store. Just search the podcast at teespring.com and check out our hoodies, t-shirts, and mugs. I also have a children's book called Feldman Runs Away, which is on Amazon.com. You can always support the podcast by going to Apple or Spotify, wherever you listen, subscribe, rate, and review. This podcast does have graphic content. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thanks, everybody. Hey everybody, welcome to True Crime Freaks, you freaks. This is another insane episode, and we're going to get to it in a second, but let me just tell you, this is graphic content, and I usually say that at the beginning of every episode, but this also includes children in this episode. So if that's a problem for you, do not listen. It was really tough for me to get through it. I couldn't get through all of it, but just a warning. He was the most vicious and horrific serial killer of all time. He made his victims swear to Satan. He casually ate food from their fridge after he murdered them. He was a true coward, climbing into the windows of people's homes while they were asleep. One day, the people of LA had had enough. They found him and they beat him and they chased him down the street like a dog. This is the story of the Night Stalker. Welcome to True Crime Freaks, you freaks. So I had no intention of doing this episode of the podcast on this Netflix series because I remembered his story and I wasn't impressed. I really didn't want to go back and do older serial killers, older cases of serial killers from the 70s or the 80s or 90s or anything like that, like Ted Bundy, Son of Sam. I was really not going to do those. I was just going to do newer cases because I feel like everybody's seen these 1,000 times. But this Netflix series, the Night Stalker Netflix series, there's 4 episodes, really shook me to my core. There were things that I had no idea about. And I've seen online some people, criticizing the series and saying that it was a 6 out of 10 and that, the way that they shot the scenes in between the detectives discussing the murders was awful or badly done. For me, it wasn't about the production value. It was about the stories that I'd never heard about this guy, how many people he killed and how many people he terrorized and raped and what he did to them. Which, and abducting children, and it's hard for me to say this, and raping them was like just so horrific that a whole city didn't know because there were Asians and whites and Hispanics that were attacked, and it was old people and children. Nobody knew who was next, and just how horrifying that would have been to live at that time and just not know if this guy's going to sneak in your window at night. And could you sleep at all? But this just really shook me so to the core that I just had to do it. And so we're going to do this. I was actually scared watching this documentary. I was watching it late at night because my girlfriend doesn't like to watch these true crime things. And it was, 11 p.m., midnight later, and I was scared watching this. I mean, I can't even imagine what it would be like if this guy was in Atlanta, in the city that I live in, and just going around doing this, because I would not have been able to sleep. It made me really angry, this series, what he did to people, and I wanted to see how he was caught, how he was punished. I had to keep watching. I had to find out what happened. And like I said, I could only watch it late at night, which made it even scarier. Like, I have seen a lot of true crime documentaries. I've listened to a lot of podcasts, and this was the most horrifying one because he was just completely vicious and total evil.
I was in alliance with the evil that is inherent in human nature, and that was who I was. Walking Dead.
Okay, so first we're going to talk about episode 1. Much of this episode focuses on the two main detectives in the case. Their names are Detective Gil Carrillo, who was the new guy, a guy from the street. He grew up in East LA. He's very jovial and like joke around. He had a huge heart. And as he says, he has a soft spot for kids. Frank Salerno was kind of the opposite of Gil, and he was the veteran detective, all business, very thorough, doesn't miss a detail, and is serious as a heart attack. He is the opposite of Gil and already a legend in the department because he has caught the Hillside Strangler. Okay, so we're going to talk about the suspect in these murders. These two detectives and a lot of other people are chasing these murders. And the suspect wore gloves. He stole cars, which means he was very hard to trace. Normally you could find a car description or a license plate, go back to the killer. DNA was not really happening at this time. It was just blood type, and you could see if someone had the same blood type, so it would narrow it down. But he would have victims from 6 years old to 90 years old. White, Asian, Hispanic. He used guns, knives, handcuffs, thumb cuffs, tire irons. I mean, this guy did everything. He was a vicious, vicious killer. So they talked about Gil Carrillo, the detective's life, a little bit, and he said he had 3 goals in life. He wanted to marry his wife, which he ended up doing. She was an ex-girlfriend who he didn't think he could get back, but he eventually did. He wanted to go to college, and he did. He went to a college. And he wanted to be a cop. Those were his 3 goals in life. And eventually he did become a cop. He grew up in East LA. And this was his town. This is where he lived. He wanted to be a homicide detective eventually. And after only 9.5 years, he became a homicide detective. Frank Salerno, the veteran detective, they worked for the sheriff's department, the LA Sheriff's Department, homicide division, both of these guys. And Frank Salerno said that they ran 350 to 400 murders a year. Tony Valdez, who was a reporter for KTTV News, said a lot of murders were solved 20 years later because of the Bulldogs. The Bulldogs was the homicide division of the sheriff's department in LA. That's what they called them, the Bulldogs, because they would never give up and they would always solve the crimes. Gil said Frank Salerno was the Italian stallion, and he was the guy who got the Hillside Strangler. So everybody revered Frank. According to Laurel Erickson, a reporter at KNBC News, Frank Salerno was a straight shooter. He had a poker face. Deputy John Broussard of the LA Sheriff's Department said that Frank overlooks nothing. He is so thorough on an investigation. Frank asked Gil to lunch at an Italian restaurant with the rest of the homicide squad. Gil was so excited. He was like the young guy in the group, and he was so excited to be there. He said he'd never been to an Italian restaurant. He ordered chicken parmesan. He's sitting there with all the homicide detectives, and he was in heaven because this was his dream. And he said, it does not get any better than this. Hey, everybody. I just wanted to give a shout out to all the people listening to this podcast. Thank you so much. But the international listeners, if you can go to social media and let me know where you're listening from, how you're listening, if you're in your car, your home, at work, if you're listening to Apple, Spotify. And I just want to say we have a ton of listeners in India. We've got listeners in Russia, New Zealand, Iceland, Poland, Pakistan, Germany, the Philippines. Okay, so I don't want to forget about the U.S. listeners. There's a ton of them, and thank you so much. Also, let me know where you're listening, how you're listening. Atlanta, Chicago, Cheyenne, Wyoming, Phoenix, Louisville, Lake Mary, Del Mar, Cincinnati, Miami, St. Paul, Lubbock, Owings Mills, St. Louis, Evans, Utah, Knoxville, Tennessee. People listening from all over the United States. It's so great. If you can go to social media and let me know where and how you're listening, that would be awesome. I appreciate you listening, and have a great day, everybody. Rosemead, California, March 17th, 1985. The Dale Osaki murder, Maria Hernandez attempted murder. Maria came home. She lifted up the garage. She was walking into the garage and she saw the killer with the gun pointing right at her face. She lifted up her hands to block the bullet or to do something, I don't know, just probably to block the bullet, and she had her keys in her hand and the bullet ricocheted off her keys. It saved her life. She did not get shot. So it knocked her to the ground, and the suspect, the killer, thought that she was shot in the face, and he ran into the house and went after her roommate. She ran up the street, and then she thought of her roommate being in the house alone with this killer, so she ran around the front, and she heard a gunshot, and then the suspect came running out, pointed the gun at her again. She said, "Wait, you just shot me. Are you going to shoot me a second time?" And he just looked at her, put the gun down, and walked away. When the killer was in the house and she heard the gunshot, the killer did something very strange. And Gil talks about this later, but rather than just shoot the woman from behind and kill her because it was a robbery and he was going to steal stuff, he waited for her to turn around, and she sort of lifted her head up over the counter to peek and see if he was there. And once he pointed the gun at her face and he saw the fear in her eyes, that she was terrified, that's when he shot her. So we're learning as time goes on that this killer gets something out of seeing the terror in people's eyes, the fear in people's eyes before he kills them. Monterey Park, California, also March 17th, 1985, the same day, 40 minutes later. Tsai Leanne Yu is murdered. She was just driving her car down the street and the suspect pulled her out of her car and shot her. Her last words were, "Help me." Maria Hernandez went to a sketch artist. They had a drawing of the killer. Gil remembered a class that he took at college. He remembered there was a sexual deviancy where some killers like to see a frightened look on the person's face when he's killing them, and it turns him on. Gil thought that the suspect wanted to see that fear. March 27th, 1985, Vincent and Maxine Zazzara, Whittier, California. I don't have their exact ages, but they were older, like grandparents' age. He got in the house through an open window in the bathroom. Vincent is executed while sleeping on the couch. He has a gunshot wound to the temple. A .22 is used. Maxine had several stab wounds above the vagina. She was raped and he cut her eyes out. The suspect left a shoe print at the scene. This is a tough one. I don't like to get into children too much. This is just a horrible, horrible story that I don't even want to tell, but I feel like I have to tell a little bit of it. I'll try not to be too graphic here. Anastasia Hronis survived, but she was 6 years old when she was abducted from her bedroom, and she was woken up and ushered out the window. She was carried in the night. This was the hardest segment to watch in the documentary, and it's the hardest to talk about. He drove her in the car, and he made her open the glove compartment and showed her his gun. He said, "Remember that is there. Don't mess with me." He put her in a duffel bag, a zipped up duffel bag, and said, "Be quiet." Okay, so the girl who was abducted, Anastasia, is talking about this as an adult woman, and it's devastating. It's so horrifying. It must have been so horrifying for this little girl to go through this. And that's why later on you'll see in episode 4 that these groupies and these people who love the suspect are so disgusting to me. This man raped a child. He abducted her at 6. He's cutting people's throats. He's shooting them in the head. And these groupies are getting pentagram tattoos like him and sending him love letters. It's so insane to me. It's so crazy. He murdered people in their sleep. He raped women. He cut people's throats. How can you ignore that? I will never understand it. Anastasia said she remembered dogs barking and a chain-linked fence. She remembered a dingy room with a couch and covered up windows so the light wouldn't come in. She said it was slimy there. It was food packages, takeout, and it wasn't like my house. Madonna was playing constantly on the radio like a virgin in Holiday. She said, "Stop. Why are you doing this?" And she said he would look at me as if to say, "I'm sorry I'm doing this to you." Okay, I have to stop for a second. Hold on. So this guy is pure evil. He dropped her at a gas station. Eventually, he said, "Go to the gas station, call 911, have your family come get you." This is one of the most awful stories I've ever heard about hurting a child. A series of young boys and girls were abducted at the same time and assaulted, raped, and it was around the same time. I mean, the 8-9-year-old kids, just disgusting. The detectives assumed that the abductions and the murders were different people. Homicides and sex crimes were usually different people. There was no one in criminal history who did both crimes: child abduction, sex crimes, and murder. It had never been documented before. It had never existed before. This is the first person who did this suspect. Gil thought about all the cases, and he thought the child abductions and the murders were related. He told the detectives, and the older detectives laughed at him. Whenever he left the room, they would make fun of him for his theory. This is coming from Linda Arthur, crime scene technical, LA County Sheriff. Linda thought Gil was right. They took Arturo Robles into custody. He had an answer for everything. Arturo was chasing some girls, some young women around the street and driving after them and talking to them and asking them to get in his car. So he became a suspect. He kind of looked like the sketch that the sketch artist did of the suspect. So Gil brought him in. They arrested him and they said, "Are you going after women? Are you trying to put women in your car?" And Arturo said, "I like women." And Gil asked Maria Hernandez to come see his picture. She said it might be him. He might be the killer. So they got a search warrant and they went to Arturo's house and they found dirty pictures and cut out dirty pictures of ladies naked and, you know, stuff like Playboy magazine cut up. And then they found some underwear that was sliced in the crotch. He had a black members only jacket, which is the suspect was supposed to be wearing. So they had a lineup and no one, not even Maria Hernandez, could pick this guy in a lineup. And Frank Salerno told Gil, he said, "This guy's a freak, but he's not your guy." May 14th, 1985. 66-year-old William Doy and Lily Doy. This is from Linda Arthur, the crime scene technical, LA County Sheriff. "When I arrived at the scene, it was really violent and destructive. The suspect shot Doy and then raped and beat his wife. William Doy saved his wife's life by calling 911. Strangely enough, Lily Doy was wearing thumb cuffs. They're kind of like handcuffs, but they're just on the thumbs. And I won't get too graphic like this, but one of her thumbs was bleeding profusely because she had, pulled it away from the cuff. Frank Salerno had never seen a case with thumb cuffs for 18 years. There was another child abduction at a construction site. There was a shoe print from the sneaker. It was the same footprint as the Zazara crime scene. So they had a connection between the murders and the abductions. Gil lost his partner. Frank's partner retired, and Frank asked Gil to be his partner. Frank was Gil's idol. Gil was thrilled to be his partner. Laurel Erickson, reporter. They were an odd couple. Frank was all business and Gil was a jovial, happy, big guy. June 28th, 1985, city of Arcadia. Patty Elaine Higgins, murdered. He cut her throat and stabbed her in the same area of his throat where he slashed it several times. This was an angry, violent killing. July 2nd, 1985, Mary Louise Cannon. Her throat was also slit, the same as Patty Higgins. Sierra Madre, California, July 5th, 1985, Whitney Bennett, 16. He entered through the window. There was blood on the wall. Looked like he was wearing a gardening glove. She was beaten with a tire iron. Okay, so this is making me sick to my stomach. I'm looking at the bedroom where the 16-year-old girl slept and was attacked in her sleep. She was probably woken up, and the bed is soaked with blood and the walls have blood splatter. It's just disgusting, and the entire room is destroyed. There's stuff thrown everywhere. Drawers are everywhere. Clothing is strewn about. This was a violent rage attack coming from this killer. For a stranger, for no reason, someone you don't even know, to beat them that badly with a tire iron is absolutely evil. They have a photo of Whitney, just her entire head is covered with bandages and her lip is swollen. She has cuts on her face, and she said she didn't remember anything. She woke up all bloody and beaten. This is Gil talking. He said she ended up with 42 inches of lacerations and skull fractures. Frank is talking now, and he's visibly upset. It's a difficult situation to interview a 16-year-old who has gone through this. You want to get your hands on this individual. He's visibly upset. Okay, so let me just say this for a second. This guy is such a coward. He is a grown man attacking a 16-year-old girl with a tire iron. I wish he would attack a man his age and get his ass kicked. He's such a coward. They found a shoe print and blood on the comforter of her bed. It's the same footprint at the Zazara murder and the child abduction at the construction site. This is a serial killer. Gil was right. Okazaki, Silent Yu, the Zazaras, William and Emily Doy, Patty Lane Higgins, Mary Cannon, and now Whitney Bennett. They weren't all Gil's cases, but they were all connected. All the same killer. Frank was on board, and once he was on board, the entire sheriff's department was. The captain told them, let's go at it. Everything moved really fast after that, Gil said. We got us a serial killer. Okay, so hindsight is 2020, but I just had this thought. If I did live in LA at the time, which I probably wouldn't have stayed there, I would have moved. I definitely would have left the state, because why stay there? Someone's going to kill you at some point, and I wouldn't be able to sleep, and that's just the way I am. And I have children, and I'd want to protect them and have them all sleep in my room, and I'd probably buy a gun. It would just be too much. I would just leave the state and hope that I was doing the right thing. But if I didn't move, I would have probably, and I just had this thought after this whole episode was over, I probably would have gotten 2 large dogs, rescues or whatever, however I would find them, mastiffs or just big, large dogs, maybe even pit bulls, and a gun for me and my girlfriend. And, if my kids were younger and I was living with them because I'm divorced, I would have had them sleep in my room, and we would have had guns and 2 dogs in the room, because I would not leave this up to chance. But in this situation, I believe that anyone who stayed in LA, must have known that they could have gotten murdered. What do you think? Let me know what you think in the comments. Would you have left LA? Would you have left the state of California? What would you have done during this time? Would you have bought guns, gotten dogs, or something else? This was the time of the Night Stalker, and anybody could have been a target. So what would you have done? Let me know. I'm interested. Thanks. Hey everybody, welcome to True Crime Freaks, my new podcast. I want to tell you about the different ways you can support this podcast. One is you can go to my other podcast, Lights Camera Pro, where I interview TV and film professionals about their careers. And I also do movie reviews and TV show reviews. You can check out one of my online courses. I've got an Adobe Premiere Basics course and a Secrets of How to Start a Podcast course. Those are at thinkific.com. Just search them when you go there. We also have a merch store. Just search the podcast at teespring.com and check out our hoodies, t-shirts, and mugs. I also have a children's book called Feldman Runs Away, which is on Amazon.com. You can always support the podcast by going to Apple or Spotify, wherever you listen, subscribe, rate, and review. This podcast does have graphic content. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thanks, everybody. Thanks to Joseph McDade for the music. I will see you next time in the next chilling story on True Crime Freaks. Thanks for listening, everybody. Have a great day. I'm Sean Bertord. Take care.